Hi, everyone, and welcome to our April event from the Rhine. This is part of our Rhine at 90 series. This is a 90th anniversary of the Duke Parapsychology Lab being formed in 1935, and the Rhine Research Center is the current evolution of that lab. We're doing the same research, same type of research that we were originally doing, trying to understand ESP, trying to understand PK, and also exploring the survival hypothesis, all aspects of parapsychology. Essentially, we're looking at consciousness and all the aspects of consciousness that we can understand and how we can scientifically explore these topics. In addition, tonight we're going to be hearing from Joe McMoneagle. Joe McMoneagle has been associated with Orion for quite a few years. Ever since I initially decided to go to a Rhine event. I've been living in Durham for a number of years, and the first Rhine event that I decided to go to was in 2008 when Joe was teaching a remote viewing course. Joe was part of the U.S. military for a number of years during the 1960s and 70s, and because of his background and because of some of the experiences that he had had, he was chosen to be a member of the Stargate program. It wasn't called Stargate at that time, but it was a government remote viewing program which was trying to learn more about this phenomena and find out if there were practical applications for it. He also did work with Stanford Research Institute with one of the research director, Ed May, who was out there for quite a few years. Ed was also the research director for Stargate for a number of years. Joe is here with us to tell us about remote viewing and his background in remote viewing, and to talk a little bit about how this kind of connected him to the Rhine at some point. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So, Joe, thank you for being here with us tonight. Really happy to have you.
Over the years, a lot of things have been said about remote viewing, and much of it comes from people who don't actually know anything about it. They read a few books and decide that they know what remote viewing is and how it works, and a lot of people even that even go and learn something about it still make mistakes. And the reason why is very few people read anything about the science that backs it up. The science is critically important because it tells you what you should be doing and it tells you what you shouldn't be doing. There's a lot of mistakes you can make. One of the things that I always say to people when I start a new class, which I'm actually going to be starting a remote viewing 2 tomorrow at the Monroe Institute. One of the things I like to say about it that surprises people, it's not about learning anything new. Remote viewing is a skill set. In order to learn it and learn it properly, what you need to do is stop doing the things that you've been taught to do since the day you were born. You need to approach it in an entirely different way. It's more of an unlearning than a learning. A lot of the habits we have in the way we learn things and we talk about them are critically important, but for remote viewing, they get in the way and they do a lot of damage to it. In remote viewing, you can't make any assumptions or jump to conclusions. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to make a presentation and talk about all the differences that I can speak to, and hopefully it'll help people understand what I'm talking about. Facts and fiction. There's a lot of fiction about remote viewing, and you can see it if you go on the internet and see what a lot of people say about it and a lot of the demonstrations and things that they do. Remote viewing is actually something that was begun not because we wanted to see how it could be applied or anything. Originally, it was to spend a very short period of time recruiting and seeing if people that could do it could exercise it against our own targets. By exercising it against our own targets, for instance, perhaps the White House, I don't know, Langley, the National Security Agency, that sort of thing. we would have some collection of information based on the use of remote viewing. That base of information that we would collect over a short period of time after we had been appropriately trained and taught to use it would then be turned over to an independent agency and evaluated. And based on that evaluation, they would determine whether or not it was a threat. If it was determined to be a threat, then what they would do is they would try to develop a defense. In respect, that should have taken only a year and a half, perhaps at the max, or 2 years maximum. What actually occurred, in fact, was we started the program, and it was used to do a couple things right up front. Even before we had established remote viewers, we used a number of psychics. I think it was 3 psychics, possibly 2. I can't remember now. It's so far back, to locate a missing Soviet bomber that disappeared over the Central Africa area. They've been looking for it for a long time. And of course, everybody was looking for it, to include terrorist organizations. Nobody could find it. It had vanished. And the effort to find it was brought to the attention of the beginnings of our program. There were some people at Wright-Patterson Air Base. I'm sure that Dale Graff had something to do with that. And folks at Fort Meade and other places came together with their maps and had some of the better psychics try to determine by dowsing the maps where the actual location was. In fact, they did make a location known, and that location was very close from all the psychics that participated. So they sent in a team of people to find out whether or not it was actually there. And in fact, as soon as they were on the ground, they were running into local natives that were stripping parts of the plane, supposedly to repair the leaks in the ceilings of their huts. So we were able to recover everything from the plane and that was all turned back to the Soviets. It was given back to the Soviets. In fact, President Carter gave a news report on it. And at the news report, one of the newsmen asked him, how did we eventually find that plane? Because so many had looked for it for so long. And the fact that we had found it was a surprise to everyone. He said, well, we used our psychics. So right at the get-go, we had to have a name change. The actual original name of the project at the very, very start, that was about the date I was being recruited, it was called Gondola Wish. That name became Grill Flame, was the original operational name, where we were going to do the original study and everything. The origins of remote viewing go back a long way in actuality. It's pre-Stargate history, that's for sure. In the mid-40s, late 1978, there was a lot of poking around at remote viewing by exercises, certainly at Stanford. But in the I guess the late 1800s through around 1946, at the end of the war, there was a man named René Rolcollier who did a presentation at the Sorbonne in 1946, and he contributed study of his mental imagery and telepathic drawings that he had done between himself and his daughter. He lived approximately 78 kilometers away from his daughter. And what they would do is put drawings on the kitchen table, and whoever did the drawing put it on their kitchen table. The daughter or he would then try to see what the drawing was remotely, and then draw it and send it back. And they did this mostly by mail. It was they weren't able to work on it during the First World War or the Second World War for obvious reasons, but by the end of the Second World War, they were able to put all their things together and make a formal report at the Sorbonne, and it was received very well by the scientists there. Prior to that, let me back up a minute. Prior to that, there are instances of remote viewing that were pointed out by Stephen Schwartz that go back probably to Grecian times, where double-blind reports on different psychics and different psychics or different people were shown to be able to describe or report on things that they knew nothing about. In fact, the Oracle of Delphi was able to give a response to a question before ever hearing the question. And it turned out that she was about 100% correct on her report, telling where the actual person who wanted to know the answer, where he was and what he was doing alone at the time, hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So that was kind of interesting. So there's many instances through time of remote viewing. So remote viewing wasn't new. It's just that there was never a protocol designed or put on it that people would have to follow. Ingo Swan was tipped to SRI research by Clive Baxter in 1971. That's a guy who figured out that you could threaten trees and bushes and things, plants. In his studies of doing the plants, he met Ingo in New York and told him about it. And eventually, Swan made connections with the Stanford Research Institute and moved there in 1972 to participate in some of their studies. Publications by the SRI team includes the proceedings of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers in 1976. They showed how they had used remote viewing. 1979. Simultaneously, numerous entities were playing with remote viewing from 1972 to 1978. These different entities that were using remote viewing were located in Air Force units and in Air Force headquarters, as well as other headquarters throughout the military. But it was mostly of interest because of the rumors that established what it was, that sort of thing. Also, the original design of the protocol, which was done in 1972 at Stanford Research Institute, put down a very fixed protocol for it. There's only two protocols that were ever written for remote viewing. The first one is just straight up remote viewing. The second one is associative remote viewing, which is how to answer a binary question like yes, no, do it, don't do it, bet, don't bet, that sort of thing. Those are called forced choice problems. Forced choice problems, you don't want to be doing them just straight up whatever pops in your head. But there is a protocol where you can use remote viewing and a number of remote viewers to come up with some pretty good answers. And of course, a lot of things were done with that after that time, the design of the forced choice protocol. Stargate initiated a test program in 1978. Like I said, it started out as Gondola Wish, but then got renamed almost immediately to Grill Flame. Stargate initiated its test program. I'm sorry, I got that twice for some reason. During the fall of the American Embassy in Iran, we started getting tasked with monitoring the hostages using remote viewing. They figured this would be a magnificent test, I guess. One of the difficulties was with remote viewing, you can make reports about what you're seeing, but you don't know if it's true or not. It's very difficult to determine whether statements made in remote viewing are accurate or inaccurate. In this case, they had, of course, people who had been in that embassy just months prior and had left the embassy before it was taken over. So in a connection with the reports we were making on the hostages, we were also giving information about where they were being held, the type of room, the design of the room, furniture, colors of the walls, pictures on the walls, rugs, all kinds of things like that. So they had some things that they could look at in our reports, and where our reports were perhaps 70 to 80% accurate about the contents of the room, they assumed it was probably 70, 80% correct with regard to the hostages. One of the things that occurred at the monitoring of the hostages, a man named Hartley Trent actually came in one morning and said that he had gotten some information on the hostages. He said there was one of the hostages that had the name. He didn't know what the name was, but he said the name was something that had to do with face cards. He said that particular hostage was going to be released sometime in the next 3 or 4 days, I think, or next week anyway. And everybody was surprised because he said he would be released because of a flare-up of MS. The problem was the State Department never assigned anyone overseas that had a disease of any kind that couldn't be treated. So they disagreed that wasn't possible because he did not have a record of any form of disease. And when they were able to check, what they discovered was that he in fact had falsified his applications, and they sent him overseas. He wanted to go overseas, and he knew that if he said he had MS, they wouldn't do it. But they sent him because he never recorded it on his paperwork. So within the same approximate time period, they sent some doctors that treat MS to Europe. And within a few days of Hartley Trent's prediction, they released King, one of the hostages. He had, in fact, had MS, and it had flared up during his captivity. So that made a big impression on a lot of people. That Grill Flame Grill Flame members could pick up on that sort of thing. It became Project Center Lane eventually. Had a lot to do with the fact that President Carter kind of outed us with the Grill Flame folder. He happened to be holding it in his arms when the reporter asked him how they had located the bomber, the missing Soviet bomber. And as a result, we had our name changed. There was a lot of name changes during the period of the project, simply because no matter what they did, it seemed to leak. So many people became knowledgeable of the project simply because of how peculiar it was, and the fact that we were having successes. There were some senators and congressmen that they just couldn't not talk about it when they found out about it. So it created some problems. Became Sunstreak eventually. So there's a lot of names. Then it became Stargate, and Stargate, it stayed under the use of mostly DIA and the CIA, and was eventually terminated in November of 1995. It was terminated for no good reason that I can ascertain. The CIA never said why they did. They said it just simply didn't work, which is kind of silly since we had provided support to the CIA for 23 years. Dr. May uses an interesting way of ascertaining its usefulness. He said if you were to start a brand new restaurant and invite some of the best food critics in the world when you open the doors the first time, and say 10 of them showed up, and then the following week 9 of them showed up, and the following week 7, and the next week 10, and that just kept repeating itself for many, many years. It's just something about its value and the taste of the food, or how good the food is. So the fact that we kept getting requests from the CIA and others for 23 straight years was simply the truth of it. Remote viewing as a science moved to the Laboratories for Fundamental Research in 1995 after the lab was closed at Science Applications International Corporation at the termination of the project. And that's where it resides today. And I have to say we're still willing and able to do any kind of research there. So it's just a matter of funding. I won't say that the funding from the federal government wasn't good. It was great. It enabled us to do a lot of things. But the one thing most people don't know is a huge portion of that funding was handed out to other labs to aid and assist us in that research. I'm using the pregnant us now. I was just working there at the same time. So a lot of people got to share in that funding, and a lot of things were discovered about remote viewing and psi functioning in its totality. There are differences between being psychic and a remote viewer. A psychic gets everything in a spurious way. They may be talking about the very target or the subject matter at hand, and will say something like, "Oh, I just had something pop in my head about it." And in many cases, that may be right. The difficulty is you don't know if it's psychic information or if it's something they read somewhere or some conclusion they came to based on what they had knowledge of regarding the target. It's impossible to know. And so there are times when psychic functioning appears to be every bit as accurate as anything else. And I'm sure at times it is. I've known psychics throughout my life who were every bit as good as any of the remote viewers I've known. The problem is, for some reason, most of the psychics I've known now call themselves remote viewers. And they didn't have to do that in order to show or to demonstrate the accuracy or their capabilities, because they've been as accurate as long as I've ever known them. So the fact that they needed to do that, I don't understand at all. But there's a lot of people out there now calling themselves remote viewers, and the difference is very, very large. They can't do that in reality because they're not following the remote viewing protocol. The remote viewing protocol is extremely strenuous, and people who can't do psychic functioning under the protocol should never call themselves remote viewers. Most don't even know what the protocol is. Major difference. Okay. In remote viewing, it's always planned. There's always a target and there's always a intent intended for that target. None of that intent or the target is ever known by anybody doing the remote viewing or anybody in the room with the remote viewer. The psychic is spontaneous. It's not controlled. It happens quite frequently, just spurious. The remote viewer is always controlled. No one is ever allowed in the room with the remote viewer, or anyone in the room with the remote viewer has to be as blind as the remote viewer is. What that means is totally blind. There's no hints. There's no, you can tell them it's an event or it's a description of a human being we're looking for. There are no hints. It's completely blind. The intent's put down in a sealed envelope, or it's a picture, or whatever the target might be represented by, is always blind to the target, to the remote viewer, or anyone in the room with the remote viewer. Usually it's a monitor, someone who interacts with the remote viewer. The psychic sometimes know the target. Like I said before, they could be even discussing the target when they have an insight for it. It doesn't denigrate the value of the insight if it's a truly psychic insight. But in many cases, it's hard to tell. Some psychics are extremely good at providing support and finding missing people, locating missing children, that sort of thing, or even solving crimes. There's nothing wrong with a psychic. Some psychics are extremely good, but it's not remote viewing. In remote viewing, it's like I said, always completely blind. Nobody knows what the target is. They don't even know the intent. The intent is always in a sealed envelope if it's in the room at all. In fact, a remote viewer can go into the room with his monitor and just assume they're going to report on the target. They don't even need to know that there is a target. There's only a single peer-reviewed paper on the appropriate protocol for data collection and analysis using remote viewing. And that is published by Stanford Research Institute at the very beginning. I think it was either 1972 or 73. I'm not absolutely sure. But it's the only protocol for remote viewing. There are no other protocols. One of the major differences is in Stanford, when it was written, it says that all remote viewers are completely blind to the target. Anyone in the room with a viewer is completely blind to the target, and all remote viewers are kept blind to the target until it has been completely finished with. What that means is if a remote viewer is going to be targeted on the same target more than one time, let's say they're going to visit that target 8 times over a week's period, they can never be told anything about the target. In other words, they can be retargeted on something they've said. Like if someone says, this room is approximate size of the room or something that they're targeted on, the monitor can say, oh, why did you say it was a large room? Or can you probe the large room that you reported and tell us more about it? You can't imply that there's a ceiling of the room. That would have to come from the remote viewer. So there's no information that's given to either the monitor, or the viewer, or anybody in the room with the viewer until the target's been completed. That's what makes it so different and so amazing when somebody does a very good target and they're completely blind. Some other methods for collecting information using remote viewing. On an expected accuracy scale for an expert remote viewer of, can't see that part. Hold on a second. No, won't move. Expert remote viewer in very best. Oh shoot, I can't read it. Sorry. Lucid
Joe,
dreaming.
it says 1 equals very best, 10 equals very poor.
Okay, thank you. While doing lucid dreaming, we were able to produce remote viewings that could be considered to be ones. Lucid dreaming is an interesting problem, though, because when you're lucid dreaming in the middle of your dream, you become awake and aware. And when you are able to signal the people monitoring your sleep, and they notice that you are awake and aware in your dreams, they can generate a target that can then be reported on. The difficult part of this, though, is that you don't know where you are in relationship to the actual lab or the location of the target. If they're producing a picture on a computer screen in the lab and you can't find a lab, then you got a problem. So in the case of some of our experiments, we just invented ways of finding the lab or being in the lab or in the target. In some cases, what I did is I just closed my eyes and said, when I open my eyes, I'll be standing in the target. And that's how I was able to describe the target, by arriving in it in my dream state. We got some really good results from it, but there's a thing called false awakening. When you're having a lucid dream and you do too many in the same session, what occurs is you have false awakening. In other words, you feel like you are awake and you're reporting on the target you just did. And somewhere in that process, you see the color of the walls changing or something. So you're awakening from a lucid dream into a second lucid dream. If that happens too many times, you start worrying about whether or not you can get back to the normal reality, or what we call normal reality. In my discussions with Stephen LaBerge in doing lucid dreaming, I asked him, how can you tell when you're actually awake or when you're in a lucid dream? And he said, you can't. And I agree with him. So people with a less than good strength of mind should probably not be playing around with lucid dreaming and doing some kind of a function in it at the same time. You can get pretty squirrely after a while. Out of body, I would say it's an 8 in comparison to remote viewing. The problem with out of body is you have no control whatsoever on exactly where you wind up. I've been out of body spontaneously, and I also spent 14 months learning how to control my out of bodies with Robert Monroe in his lab at the Monroe Institute. I spent long weekends there. The problem with out of body is when you separate and you are backing away from your body or leaving your body, it's possible to back into something that will surprise you. The example I would give, you can be out of body and accidentally turn into the insides of, let's say, a crystal chandelier. Inside a crystal chandelier in the out of body state, it's an amazing feeling. You get all kinds of colors and strange effects that you've never experienced before. And it sort of captures you, and you lose sight of what it was you were going out of body, the reason you were going out of body for. So my recommendation is not be used while out of body. It's not quite as accurate as remote viewing. Many of the perceptions are squirrely. We, I think, invent some of the perceptions in the out of body state because we're not sure. So we add parts and pieces to it to make it more realistic or make it feel better or seem to be better. It's hard to say whether or not that's absolutely true. I just found it to be true in my own case. And so that's what I am reporting here. I wouldn't say it's occurring with everybody, but it's with me, it occurs. Under hypnosis, absolutely does not work. Hypnosis is an altered state. In any altered state that you operate in doing remote viewing, it's just like taking a drug. You'll invent things. And when you can't tell the invention from the fact, then it's of no use from a practical standpoint. So hypnosis does not improve remote viewing, shouldn't be used. In an altered state, it depends on the altered state. If you take a drug that puts you in a psychedelic, some kind of a psychedelic state, no, it doesn't aid or assist in the remote viewing. A lot of people think, oh, well, I'll just take some ayahuasca or something like that, and it will make my viewing improve. No, as soon as you do that, what happens is you're losing the direct control of your own mind. You have to have complete and total control over your mind and your processing in order to do good remote viewing. It's absolutely required. In an altered state, it sometimes will work, but the altered state would be the state like disassociation, where you've locked out or blocked everything in the area that you're doing your remote viewing in. In other words, you shut out the room, the people, the sounds, all that sort of thing. That's probably the only supportive altered state to remote viewing that I'm aware of. Future viewing. Well, future viewing is interesting. When you go into the past, it's pretty easy to describe what's going on, and everybody that you describe it to will understand it, simply because all the concepts that allow it to happen are occurring and everything's real. If you go into the future, you don't have to go in the future very far. You just have to go into the future a couple of days sometimes, and you'll be reporting on something that no concept exists for yet. The example I would use would be if you were to target the room at Sylvania Corporation when they first designed or first experimented with a pump laser and were able to create a intense enough light beam to burn through a plate of steel or iron. If you were reporting on that from a remote viewing viewpoint, let's say a week or even a month ahead of that discovery, if you were reporting on that in perfect detail as a remote viewer, everybody would look at you like you were insane. Nobody can burn a hole through steel with a light beam. That's nuts. So lacking the actual concept that brings belief in what it is you're doing, it's nip and tuck when you go into the future. Also, time, since it's not real, time is a figment of our imagination. Whenever you do a target in the future and you have to guesstimate when that's going to occur, it's almost never accurate. Time is extremely difficult for the to go out. So that's difficult as well. Future viewing is something I would stay away from. I wrote a book, Ultimate Time Machine, where I was trying to point out that we as humans can get a vision of the future. The problem is, again, if we do get a vision of the future, putting that into a concept that's understandable is extremely difficult. And actually knowing when that event's going to occur is even more difficult. So as far as using remote viewing for that, I think it's something that also can be accurate or not accurate, and there's nothing we can do to control that. Past viewing, on the other hand, is real easy. The past viewing, you can go back as far as you want. If it has anything to do with the development of a concept, we're well versed in that concept further back we go. We have lots of information about things that were going on tens of thousands of years ago, if for no other way, through anthropology and that sort of thing. So using remote viewing to delve into the past to report accurate locations for, say, burial sites, finding old mines where the copper came from for the Bronze Age, that sort of thing. You can do that because the concepts of how and why it was used are well known. Great distances may decay a little bit farther away they are, simply because we can't prove that the response is real. But other than that, distance has no material effect on remote viewing. Neither does time, as I said. The report at distance from anything is instantaneous. So there's something else going on there. It probably has to do with dimensional violations of dimension, or it has something to do with the fact that how we believe the universe is constructed isn't true completely, or we don't understand it completely enough to be able to say that it's not or it is. So distance is an amazing thing. There's a long way you can go in distance to report on remote viewing targets. Greater distances, like I said, they just get a little bit more difficult. Large objects or small objects. Large objects, bridges, whole cities, that sort of thing. It outside of the fact that they're very large, very complicated. It will take an enormous amount of time to do a remote viewing of a large object. One of the examples I would use is I was targeted on an individual who was standing in the power generation area of a accelerator. I don't know if anybody's ever been inside the power generating end of an accelerator, but I can tell you it is so complicated. There's no way a remote viewer is going to report on it in detail. The best you can do is just say what it is. So the more complicated or larger the target is, the more difficult it gets. Smaller objects, however, are really interesting. I've done a lot of work in remote viewing with a doctor who was I can't remember his name right now. He passed away last year. He was the head of physics at Texas A&M College Station. And I was able to do some work with him on some particles that were captured, and they fly the fly unit out in the desert. And some of the reports I made, he said I was reporting on things accurately down at the 10 to the 20 or 10 to the 25 size in terms of reduction of size. That's amazing, because normally you have to put a particle in an accelerator and blow it to pieces in order to report on those things. The fact that we were getting accuracy out of remote viewing without destroying the actual center of the particle is amazing. Anyway, so those are another couple of things. The unknown is absolutely 10. Unknowns would be the insides of UFOs, UAPs, NIHs, aliens, multidimensional beings, that sort of thing. There's no way to know the truth of the matter. All you can do is hypothetically say something. And if somebody wants to believe you, they will. If they don't want to believe you, they won't. The only way to know if any of that's true is to eventually find the ground truth of it. So I hate doing unknown targets. I was tasked on Mars, and I reported on Mars. And rather than sit back and just accept whether or not it was accurate, what I did is I went to JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, and obtained the negatives for the targets that I actually did and was able to put those in a book. I've since done a lot more targeting on Mars, and I've always chased down the actual location after the target was completed and found the photographs to prove or disprove what I was doing. Mysterious, the same thing. Mysterious would be apparitions. It would be things like the Mothman, these kinds of things, where once in a while someone claims they see something and it becomes almost a mythological object. The only way to prove it is to determine whether or not it is mythological or to chase down enough information to show that it isn't. Then it's no longer a mysterious thing. But mysterious targets are something I also try to stay away from. Known facts about remote viewing. Who is psychic? Well, every human being on the planet is psychic. It has something to do with our survival. It's a survival mechanism. It has something to do with why we're still here. It protects us when we're under threat. And being psychic has to do with both gross responses and smaller responses. It's usually not a response that gives a complete overall view of something. You can get that, but only after you've been a remote viewer for many, many years. It's like a skill set. I call it the martial art of the mind, and I have done that since 1976. As a martial art of the mind, everybody starts as a white belt. Eventually, over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of experience, you can develop your skill set to a point where you could say you're a greater belt, like a black belt or a brown belt or something. But you cannot say that at the beginning because everybody starts the same place. I've been told by many people that I'm a natural and I didn't have to work for what I do. I got some news for those people. I had to work every bit as hard as any other human being to become the psychic that I am, the remote viewer that I am. So if you're not prepared to involve yourself for many, many years, it's not going to be something you'll ever develop good talent with. Everyone has a psychic ability. What makes a world-class remote viewer? Practice, practice, practice. And when I say that, I mean just that. I've done a remote viewing at the beginning every day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. I was a remote viewer for 7 years in the military, and I did remote viewing every single day. When I retired from the military, I continued doing remote viewing in my own company, and I worked for every single lab that remote viewing was used in. I went to work at Stanford Research Institute. When they closed the lab there, I went to Science Applications International Corporation. I worked there. When the labs closed as a result of the Stargate program ending, I went to Laboratories for Fundamental Research, where I worked with Dr. May for many years. So it's not something that was developed overnight. My capacity as a remote viewer has been developed over decades. And people that don't believe that, well, I can't help you. What's unique about a remote viewer's background? Very little. What people have to understand in remote viewing, when I said you don't learn something new, you have to unlearn about a lot of bad habits. What I mean is that every human being on this planet is different. We all come from different cultural backgrounds, different personalities, different religions, different teaching, different parents, different places of growth and where we were raised, and different mythologies. And there are no two people on this planet that are exactly the same. So to say that everybody can do the same thing the same way is totally wrong. When we teach remote viewing at the Monroe Institute, what we try to do is we try to teach it as a team. There is no such thing as just a remote viewer. The remote viewer, when the first remote viewer starts, they have to have somebody looking out for their logic side. That's the monitor. Many remote viewers make a lot of mistakes when they're doing the remote viewing. They write sloppily. You can't read their writing. They delve off into different areas that have no functional meaning at all to the target. The monitor can watch what the remote viewer is doing and make suggestions on what they shouldn't be doing or what they should be doing, only based on what they're saying and where they're going. So if somebody writes sloppily, the monitor can say, you need to print that or I can't read it. What they have to remember is the third person in this teamwork is the analyst, the person who uses the data. If the person using the data can't understand it, it's of no value. So when you talk about remote viewing, you have to talk about a monitor, a viewer, and an analyst. And nobody talks to the analyst. In other words, the analyst can be hundreds of miles away. So that the information can be done very sloppily and be of no use or validation at all. And some information can be done extremely well and can be of aid or assistance to many people. So there's a whole system there that has to operate in unison in order for remote viewing to work and to work well. People don't understand that who claim, well, I'm the remote viewer, I do everything, I know everything, and that sort of thing. You can tell they've not been taught right or it's not been instructed properly. What about a remote viewer's background? Very little. So do you have to be morally good to do it? No. That's a real surprise. Unfortunately, there are good people and bad people who learn remote viewing, but there's an impact based on that. People who do have a good moral base or develop a good moral base or a good ethical understanding for the use of remote viewing, an interesting thing happens with them. As they apply it, they see functionally how it helps or how it hurts. Over time, they develop rules, moral rules or ethical rules in its use. Because they do that, they expand in their understanding and their growth. So over time, philosophically, they become much better at it. And over practice, they become even more critical and better with the use of the remote viewing. As a result, they can become extremely good remote viewers. People who are not morally or ethically sound do it for other reasons. Because they do it for those other reasons, and there's no learning that comes with it, other than the destruction, perhaps, of someone or some issue or some place or some business. They don't learn anything from that, and their philosophic growth becomes stymied or static. So their improvement never occurs. So if you want to become a good remote viewer and you want to grow philosophically and learn more about how you think, how you work, how you believe, you're going to have to pay some attention to your morality and your ethics. It's as simple as that. What can be expected statistically? That's an interesting question. Contact with a target, almost, if you're a really good remote viewer, it'll occur 60% of the time. The problem is you don't know when it's right or when it's wrong. So developing better contact with a target requires paying attention to what you're doing and learning the skill set. You can't just be willy-nilly about it. Accuracy is dependent on the method you use. Methods are not protocols. Methods are things like what you do while you're doing the viewing. I watch a lot of people when they first get exposed to remote viewing, and the first thing they do is they close their eyes. If you close your eyes, what you do is you're closing your eyes in order to see something. You want like a blank slate, something that you could see something against. That's a wrong thing to do if you want to learn remote viewing, because you're automatically cutting out all your other senses. your sense of sound, smell, taste, feeling, all those other senses are set aside automatically when you close your eyes. That's why I was talking earlier about the one alternative that you can use in the would be the disassociation. By disassociating from a room, you can keep your eyes open, and you can be in your head doing the remote viewing and using all of your senses, and no one will even know you're doing it. Uh, Close your eyes, and you've just cut out all your other senses in order to see something. And remote viewing is a bad title for something that's a good thing. Remote viewing is not seeing, it's sensing. Sensing is everything about remote viewing. Give up the idea of seeing. I would say in the literally thousands of remote viewings I've done, I see it very, very seldom, almost never. So I might see a piece or a part. Other than that, no, it doesn't happen. It's put together in my mind using all of my senses. So you have to be able to use all of your senses and not pay any attention to your sight. In fact, sight is one of the senses that lies to us the most. What we see is what we want to see. What we don't want to see, we won't see. And no two people see the same thing when they're standing in the same place looking. If you don't believe me, talk to some interrogators. They will tell you. You can have an incident in a room with 30 people, and you'll have 30 different reports on it. Can remote viewing be trained? Absolutely. You can train someone in the protocol. That's not the method. That's the protocol. What they have to then do, you can even suggest different methods, but what they have to do is decide for themselves by learning more about how they think and what they do in their head, what the best method for them is. You can't dictate that method because everybody does something differently. It's like when you learn math, people have little shortcuts they develop in their head. They use those shortcuts, and the people that are really good at math are really good at developing those shortcuts. People who are bad at math have no shortcuts. So the methodology is going to be dependent on how the person thinks and what they're trying to learn and how good they are at picking it up. You can't make someone a better remote viewer than they will eventually be based on their innate talent and skill. Having said that, what that means is it's not just the training, it's the practice, it's how much effort somebody puts into it. It's how badly they want to become a really good remote viewer. It's how much they pay attention to what's going on up here in their own head, what they're doing with whatever's coming into their mind. There's a lot of wrong things to do and a lot of good things to do. I've had so many people say to me, Joe, can you tell me what I'm doing wrong? No, I can't, because I can't get inside somebody's head and tell what they're doing wrong. Everybody does it differently. Everybody processes it differently. I heard once, based on another trainer, a good trainer, in fact, that if you can capture the information before it's processed, that's perfect. No, you can't do that simply by the fact that you got the information, you have processed it. And that information, because it's processed, will appear differently to everybody that gets the same information. In other words, they don't get it complete. They get it partially, or they get it in ways that indicate other ways of thinking about it. You have to figure out in your mind how you do your processing, when to do it, when not to do it, how to do it, how to take something that you've got and then tear it to pieces. If you can't do that, then your remote viewing just won't get any better. In 1 in 2,000 who attempt remote viewing can meet the requirements probably for eventually being a world-class remote viewer, but that will still take you 3 years. That's the minimal amount of time I think it takes to understand what it is you're doing. Before that, it's hit and miss. You're not consistent about anything until you develop the consistency based on how you process. You'll never get anywhere with it. Examples of early successes. Test and practice targets. Okay. This is a practice target I did. I did this at SRI, Stanford Research Institute. One of my detractors say something. What they always say is they accuse me of this. Many of them do. They say, "Oh well, every time we see what Joe does, it's because they leave the other 35 drawings on the floor of the remote viewing room. They only pick and choose the cherry the cherry pictures, the cherry drawings that he's done. They don't show anything else." Well, that's not true. This was a target I did. This is the only drawing I did, and that's a drawing. Now you notice that in the drawing it had a peaked roof. That's not there. That's an error. There's always going to be errors in remote viewing about the target. The other interesting thing about it is I made it into an Asian type building. Well, the fact of the matter is it's not an Asian type building. It's sitting out in the middle of a bird preserve. But the entire design of the interior is Asian. So that's how you can mix things up about a target. You can say things about the sense that it's Asian by drawing it on the outside when it's on the inside. Or in some cases, I think I have another example here, which I'll show you. This is a good example here. I had no idea what this was, but I was very informed about it. And I did this back in June of 1993. This also was a training target. And it's interesting to me because of something I'll tell you after you see the actual target. That's the actual target. It even has the bridge at the base of the waterfall. What's interesting about this target is that I never get waterfalls. If you want to hide something from me, you can put it behind a waterfall, and I will never see it. And I think it has something to do with the beauty of waterfalls. They are very impressive to me, and I want to keep them in that state in my mind. So I will never report a waterfall. That's the one time in my life that I actually did, which is kind of interesting. Why then and not now? I don't know. This is an interesting target because I had been shopping there the day before. And I even said it was the Stanford Shopping Center. And in fact, it was the Stanford Shopping Center. That's the entry. But you notice I made a dome. Well, the dome is on the inside of the building, not on the outside. The arches are there, and that's the main entry. I think it's the main entry. This is an interesting target. This is where you run into some real serious problems. This is the actual target, a restaurant next to a harbor with some boats, sailboats and things tied up. That, in fact, is true. I even put the parking lot in the right place. However, you notice I did not put the boat on the roof. Why? Because that doesn't make any sense. I was seeing boats, but there's no way I'd ever put a boat on the roof. I put them in the harbor where they belong. That's a sort of a given with remote viewing. When something doesn't make any sense, you may not report it. That's a problem with remote viewing. You have to be able to report everything you sense or see. A mission example, tracking a spy. The particular agency that came and asked us if we could track a spy, we said yes. The way it was done is I would be asked at different times where the target was. Now, the only information I had, and remember I said everything's blind, well, they needed to identify the target some way that told me nothing. So what they did is gave me a piece of paper with a social security number written on it. The only thing you could say about a social security number is it tells you it's a human being. That's it. You can't tell if it's a man, a woman, a child, an older man, a younger man, an older woman, a younger woman. You can't tell anything about the person at all from the social security number. So the first time I was asked to describe where the person was, this is what I what I did. Remember, these are single drawings. I never draw a second drawing on these targets. I said it was a number of different poles and something circular going around the poles. I couldn't tell. I usually do that sort of thing when I sense there's movement. And then the dotted lines, actually, I said that represents an actual grid of some kind moving electricity through a grid to a central place. And I said right in the middle of this grouping of towers with moving parts producing electricity, that's where that person was at that particular time. That's exactly where they were. They were parked there. And the only thing I didn't get is I didn't get the color of the rental car, which is kind of interesting. I didn't even think of that, actually. And you notice the stanchions are different. Usually when I draw something, everything I draw is completely wrong. But what it is, it represents a memory. And the memory is what keys off the answer. This is a second target I did. They asked me where this person was. And I said, oh my God, I tried to draw it like 5 times and I just kept throwing the paper away. And I finally drew this. I put an eyeball in a circle at the end of a long sort of corridor with some energy stuff at one end. And I said, this is too complicated. There's no way I can draw this. So I'm going to tell you what it is. It's an accelerator. And in fact, that's where he was standing. Remember I said that the complications with the energy part of an accelerator is just too complicated. Well, tell me you could draw that as a remote viewer. And I'll buy you dinner. That's just too much. Then I was tasked the third time, and the third time was the most difficult one for me because I couldn't exactly tell what it was. This was the drawing I drew. Now, the actual target was the building, the T-shaped building. And I said it was a T-shaped building, and I said it had 7 floors, and it did. And I said he was dead center, top floor, dead center, looking out over the area inside the wire that I drew in. I said there were a lot of small buildings and things in there, and there was some kind of a small airfield off to the side, and a tree-lined road, a big parking lot. And I said the actual office he was in was the director's office, and it was very late at night, and that's exactly where he was in that building, in the director's office, looking out over the rest of the facility. I said there was a gate at one end, in that corner, upper left corner, and there was another city some distance away. Anyway, I drew all this, and in fact, I'm going to show you a picture now. Now, one of the things you got to understand is the picture was actually taken to agree with the drawing. In other words, the drawing was not done to agree with the target picture. So you got to remember this drawing came out of my head. There was no picture. It happens to be where he was. Whenever anybody sees this drawing, they say where he was. They say he's the west gate of Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, where they build nuclear weapons. You can see the T-shaped building in the upper left, 7 stories. The center building facing out, or center room facing out, is the director's office. And that's where he happened to be. And you see the complexity of this place. The large parking lot's there, the tree-lined road is there, all the smaller buildings are there, the lab is encircled there. Everything's generally right, but nothing I drew is correct. But what it does is it generates the recall of a memory by those who have been there. And as soon as they see my drawing, they say, oh, that's the west gate of Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. So that's how remote viewing works. It's not about being precisely right. It's about being understandably right. In other words, deliver the message that's being asked. In other words, answer the message or answer the question that's being asked. Where is he? And you can do that a lot of ways, but if you can draw it as a memory or a recall, it's like you go somewhere and you never remember all the bits of data about it, but you do remember its general impression on you. It's like the gestalt of the target. And so what I have seen happen in remote viewing more than anything else is the gestalt being displayed of the actual targets. This is the last target. Let me back up one here. I was asked to report on what this person was doing. And so I made some drawings. This is where I made an exception. I did a number of drawings because I couldn't do it all in one drawing because it was different perspectives. This is actually the device. Now, none of the measurements I wrote in here are correct, but if you were to take all the words out of there and assume it to be something else like microwave, then all the measurements are correct. And it implies that it was a microwave device of some kind. I put it inside a building, not a building, but a van, a large van of some kind, so that it was hidden out of sight. And I said, it's being, putting out a wavefront at a certain number of degrees, and it was targeting electronic equipment for destruction purposes. And the overall evaluation of the target is that's exactly what it was, and this is the target. It was in a van. It actually is a microwave device. And at the same time, I made some comments all through the entire viewing about other things. I added in this particular reflective mirror. I said these mirrors are constantly tuning from top to bottom. In other words, they're broken up into pieces, and there's a computer that generates those mirrors, that conforms those mirrors in a special way, and that's going on all the time. And that's a picture of one of the mirrors. I'll tell you what this is in a minute. And then I said, this is the general layout. It's some kind of a tower with a big field in front of it. It's got kind of a big U shape. And inside that U shape, it's filled with those mirrors. And that's the actual target location. This is not the actual target of the microwave, though. What I did is I mixed his hobby with his actual job. And I did that because in my statements of the target, I said, he has this hobby. He likes to go to this place when he's not working. In other words, during his lunch breaks, things like that. And the word we got back from the actual tasking person was he has no hobbies, that he doesn't do that sort of thing. But in proximity to his location where he's building it, using his microwave, this is sitting there. And as a result, it mixed that hobby up with the actual target. Now, when I talked to him, I actually was taken out there to see the target, his target that he was constructing and working with, his experiment, as feedback. When I went out there and saw his place and everything, and I was talking to him, en route, by the way, we got stopped, and they fired up the mirrors and everything and created this sort of miniature sun on the top of the tower. And it was really exciting to see that. Poor Ed looked at me and he said, Dr. May looked at me and he said, we should have a bag to put over your head right now. It just screwed up the whole experiment. But in reality, it didn't. Because when I was talking to him, when we got to his site after we had passed the solar experimental station, I asked him in my discussion with him, I said, so what do you do? What do you do when you're not here? And he said, oh, you mean just before I got here? And I said, yeah, we followed your dust cloud coming down the road. Where were you coming from? He said, I was coming from the solar experimental station. He said, I like to go there over my lunch hour. It's kind of like a hobby of mine. And that made me feel a lot better about my viewing. So what about the future? Is it predetermined, or can we like predict something's going to happen and we can't change it, or unknown? My belief from 45 years of remote viewing is that it's not predetermined. It's unknown. If it's predetermined, it has to happen no matter whether we know it or not. In other words, if somebody said, if you go out and get in your car today, you're going to die in a car accident, I don't have to get out of bed, and it's not going to happen. So predetermination is completely under our control. It has to be something that is predicted that we have to fulfill no matter what. No matter what we do, it has to happen anyway. There's no way I'd be in a car accident and die if I never get out of the bed. So no, it's not true. What I believe is that we get lots of insight about where we're going to be and what we're going to be doing simply because we don't live in the moment. We live across a space of time. That space of time is determined by our functional awareness. As a intelligence officer, my awareness had to be local. I had to be completely aware of my location all the time. Otherwise, I could be in trouble. So my situational awareness was a big thing for me. Because of that, I was picking up on things that were coming down the pike before they happened. I was also picking up on things that had happened just before I got there. And in both those cases, you could say, oh, well, there's no way you could know that unless it was going to happen anyway. No, it's not true. It's just that in that moment, which is not real, we happen to be spread across a particular section of time. So you got to look at remote viewing as understanding that everything that will ever occur in our lifetime, anybody's lifetime, you probably already have an awareness of it. You probably already know the words you're going to speak in that moment, at that place and time, 10 years down the pike, before you ever get to it. It's just that because we're not that aware, we don't know that beforehand. Only in certain circumstances when we're paying attention or wanting to know it for some reason, like survival. Free will is always active. We can get a sense of something and fail to recognize it or fail to act on it, and that can result in something really terrible or something really good. We don't know because we're not exercising our free will. Exercising our free will would be being aware 24/7 and making the right decisions every time. Examples. The Dmitry Donskoy Typhoon class submarine launched September 27th, 1980. I actually predicted that launch. And it surprised a lot of people because it was launched from a building that was not formally attached to the harbor. They had targeted the building it was being built in for many years and had been kicked up to a national, anyway, to the highest intelligence facility we have, which is headed up by the Vice President of the United States. And nobody knew what was going on in the building. And a man named Hartley Trent, who was one of the original 6 viewers, who I have to say, and I am honestly saying this, was probably every bit as good a viewer as I am, probably even better. And in many cases was better than I could ever be. He's dead now. He passed many years ago, but as one of the original 6 viewers, he was extremely talented. And he and I came up with the idea that they were building a submarine that was put together by 2 submarines side to side, something like putting 2 seas together. And it was very large. I think somewhere in my transcript I said it was about 33 feet shy of the length of the Soviet aircraft carrier. But we said a lot about the submarine, and that went to the National Security Council, which is headed up by the vice president. The senior analyst at the time sent it back because it wasn't connected formally to the harbor. He said it was total fantasy. He thought, and many thought, that it was some other kind of vehicle or something being built inside the building. So he sent it back and said total fantasy and put his initials on it. Admiral Jake Stewart, who I knew at the time and had done other work for, had brought the actual remote viewing back to me and said, they said it's total fantasy and they don't want it. And I said, well, no, they need to know this, and I believe it's true. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, take it back. And I put a paper on top of the original paper, and I said, fantasy will be launched in 112 days. On the way back to the National Security Council, what he did is he stopped at the reconnaissance office, and he had some arrangements made to take photographs of that harbor 114 days out. He thought if I was correct, then it would have to happen. So at 114 days out, they actually photographed that particular submarine. It had been launched into that harbor and was tied up to a Soviet aircraft carrier. It's only 30 feet shy of the length of the Soviet aircraft carrier. So this is probably the best remote viewing that I and Hartley Trent ever did. It gave us a leg up on a very dangerous boat. It was the first submarine that had slanted tubes so they could launch while moving, and a number of other things we said about it. So that's how valuable remote viewing can be. That harbor is north of the Arctic Circle in an area of Russia where they need icebreakers to keep the harbor open most of the year round. And they built 8 more of these, and no one ever knew it. It's only the prototype, that particular submarine, that was captured on film. Predicted 112 days prior to its launch. May 17, 1987, the USS Stark was struck with 2 Exocet anti-ship missiles fired by an Iraqi war jet. That was predicted. Remote viewing predicted that 4 months prior. The bursting of the U.S. housing bubble, which peaked in 2006, caused the values of securities tied to U.S. real estate pricing to plummet, damaging financial institutions globally. I predicted that in my book a long time before. It helped to create the 2008 financial crisis, considered by many economists to be the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's what it looked like. I predicted that would occur in the month of September of 2006. And that was in my book, Ultimate Time Machine, which was published in 1998. And I gave numerous gateway talks at the Monroe Institute from 96 to 2004, where I brought it up. And the company I was actually working for through my own company, the CEO there, the CFO, and a number of others actually made 18% profit during that crash because of the warning that I shared with them. Predicted between 1998 and 2003, a much greater war would be fought in the Middle East. War with Iraq began on 20 March 2004. Predicted a more significant war would follow 9 to 11 years later. War in Afghanistan just ended. But what about the future now? Predicted we'd be hovering on the precipice of World War III. It will come with the collapse of a major country government sometime in the next 4 to 5 years. Doomsday clock was just adjusted closer to midnight than it's ever been historically. That's as far as I'll go on that prediction. Economy, in 2016 and 2018, it will begin to heal well, but only if the threat of World War III fails to materialize. Afghanistan, maybe. Mid-2015 will collapse back into disorder following our withdrawal into 2024. In fact, that's exactly what happened due to some bad agreements made by some. And the immediate withdrawal, which was not supposed to happen, is the way it did because, again, bad agreements. North Korea, early 2025, expect something stupid to occur in the next 9 months. Well, we haven't finished 2025 yet. I bet something stupid. Iranian atomic weapons. November 2024, as a display of force, we will enter into a joint effort with Israel to eliminate the Iranian weapons-grade nuclear materials. This is the event which will trigger a stupid action involving North Korea. Very possible. It hadn't happened yet, but who knows? What about aliens? I'm going to show you an alien. I've actually captured a picture of an alien. That's an alien. In reality, what I think an alien is us. I've thought about it a great deal, and based on a whole lot of reasons, the single greatest one being the fact that this is our planet, our home, our nest. It's so important to us for our survival. And all we, and I'm talking about us generally now as humans have taken and taken and taken from the planet and not done anything to support it. And Mother Nature is an entity unto itself. And I suspect we're going to pay for that very seriously when all this is over with the climate changes. We have to be aliens on this very planet because we don't treat it like our home. We treat it like something we arrived on and decided to strip. Can you do something good with remote viewing? It's been used to help locate 6 missing children, 5 alive. 1 did not make it, only because I got a huge fight with the particular sheriff involved who did not want to participate with the psychic. Been used on national television in Japan to find 12 of 24 missing people, dead and alive, missing for 1 to 39 years. The man who was missing 39 years walked out on his daughter and wife when the daughter was 1 year old. She was standing up in her crib when her father walked out the door and never came home. She flashed forward. She's 38 years old and had twin boys, 8 years old, and wanted to reunite them with their grandfather because ancestry in Japan is a big deal. In my remote viewing, when I started to do the remote viewing, I said, oh my goodness, I said, this man is not Japanese, he's Korean. And the man that's sitting across from me from Japan, who had brought the target in a sealed envelope, said, stop, please stop, must call Tokyo. So he called Tokyo from our kitchen phone and came back out and sat down and said, please proceed. It turned out the woman wanted to find him anyway, even though she had not seen him in 38 years. So over the course of the next 6 to 8 hours, I described everything I could to help them find the location of this man. Where they wound up was Busan, Korea. And by the time they followed all of my instructions to the letter, they wound up standing in a graveyard in Busan, Korea, looking at his identity stick. He had been dead 6 years and buried in that graveyard. They looked at the records and found he had a half brother. They also discovered that only his father knew that he had been adopted when he was a month old and taken from Korea to Japan and raised as a Japanese. No one in Japan knew it except his father. When his father was on his deathbed, he told him about it. And that's why he disappeared earlier, because after his father died, he went back to Korea to find his true mother and father and died there while looking. So subsequently, the woman and her two sons were introduced to their granduncle, his half brother, in Korea. And that's a true story. It's been used on national television, like I said, many times. Those were 2-hour specials in Japan, by the way. And we did all the remote viewing on the mountain here at the Monroe Institute property. And then flew to Japan after the detective agency used the materials to determine the location being good or bad. A class in the Department of Electrical Computer and Engineering, Energy Engineering in the University of Colorado at Boulder made almost a 400% profit on their investments using remote viewing. Russell Targ and Keith Harari earned more than $120,000 in 1982, which put them on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. They used ARV, the associative remote viewing I talked about earlier, which can be used to answer the problem of forced choice on whether or not to invest or not invest in something. And that's the result they got. Hal Puthoff made and donated more than $25,000 to a Waldorf school in 1984 using the same ARV methodology. There are at least 3 other studies using ARV to collect large sums of money, including our own. I provided assistance to half a dozen or more police and sheriff's departments, to include the Tokyo Police. Much of that will never be shown to anyone because it deals with crimes. Provide assistance to hundreds of private corporations, individual associations over the past 34 years. Demonstrated remote viewing on national level television more than 50 times with an 88% success rate. Every single one of those remote viewings were done double blind. In other words, I was brought into a studio and asked to describe the target, completely blind. No one in the studio knew what the target was in those cases. It was a target that was generated by someone outside. In one case, the thing that started it all was a show called Battle TV in Japan. In Battle TV, they brought me over to Japan and they had 2 panels. One panel was postgrads, and they all were wearing colanders on their heads with the springs and the stars and stuff bouncing around, and they were acting really crazy. And they were the believers. And the other panel was nothing but professorial people from the University of Tokyo. And the head of that panel was the head of the physics department at the University of Tokyo. And right at the beginning of the show, he gave this impassioned speech. He said, if this is successful, he said, I will come back to the show and I will prove that it's a trick. I will describe exactly how it was done, or I will resign my position at the University of Tokyo. He actually said that on national television in Japan. So in the course of the target, what I was supposed to do, they had a woman that they had taken with a film crew and sent out into the area, wherever. I don't know if she was in Tokyo or where she was. They said that they had sent her out and she was going to find a place to be. And once she was there, they would let me know and I would describe exactly where she was before anybody knew. So she eventually called in and said, I'm where I am. And all we could hear was her voice. And she started laughing. And the guy, what I said first was, I said, she's in in a fake pond inside a building. It's made to look like a outside pond circled by grass and hills with little fences and a tea house on the hill and trees. And everything in the inside the building that makes it look like it's outside are all made from concrete, and they're all painted. And I was interrupted at that point by the person, and they said, "Oh, Joe-san, that can't be true. We have no fake trees in Japan." And I kind of chuckled, and I said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's all I'm getting." So eventually, she called in and said where she was. Didn't say where she was. Said that they had the camera set up and everything, and all you could hear was her voice. And so they said, "Why are you laughing?" And she said, "Because they won't let me keep my towel. They keep trying to take my towel away." And so he couldn't understand what that meant, but they eventually turned the camera on, and she was in the middle of this pond. It's actually a bathhouse in the middle of the bathhouse, which looks like a little pond in a backyard or something. And surrounding the walls were concrete fences and little fir trees made out of stone, and a tea house on the hill. And as they were talking about where she was and what she was doing, she was in a towel and she was up to her neck in water and laughing a lot. And as they were talking, they superimposed my drawing of the tea house over the tea house, the fake tea house on the hill, and it was identical. And that sort of solved the problem. The postgrads went crazy. They were actually up on the table dancing and throwing paper at the professors. And so it was very successful, and that's what got me into the looking for missing people. Eventually, many years later, but I got an actual message back from the studio sometime after when I was back home, and they said that the professor came in for 3 days, and every day he came in, he went over the film frame by frame by frame, trying to figure out how the trick was done, and he couldn't do it. So I asked them, did he resign his position at the University of Tokyo? And they said, of course not. So I don't think he's ever going to be on television in Japan again, but that's up to them. Anyway, participated in an additional 28 years of research with Stanford Research Institute, International Science Applications International Corporation, SCIC, and the Cognitive Science Lab of Palo Alto. Now, I'm not saying that because it's a brag. I'm not bragging about that. What I'm saying that for is the fact that if you're going to do remote viewing, you have to know the science, because there's so many things about remote viewing that we know to be true and not true about remote viewing. Remote viewing is about reporting something in bits and pieces. You actually are almost not capable in the beginning of giving more than accurate words of description, perhaps, about a target location. It's extremely difficult to actually draw it perfectly and to say what it is. And it takes years of practice to do that. Maybe after 2 or 3 years, you could be capable of doing that. Also, modeling it in some way, like with clay, or by actually constructing it as a project or something. That seems to bring more accuracy into it, because I think what you're doing is you're allowing your mind to interact with the target, and your hands are also working on the target at the same time, and you're not full control of what's going on, but you are in connection with the target. Now, all those things are of value, but remote viewing is not something you learn overnight, and it's something that you have to decide how you think in order to solve the problems. in your thinking, you cannot jump to conclusions. You cannot make assumptions. You can't think in the same way you do when you are out normally thinking. Remote viewing is breaking down. It's kind of like working backwards. You get an impression about the target. You ask yourself what parts of those are real and what parts of that impression isn't. So you may get an image. You're getting information from the subconscious, I think, basically, about the target. And the only way that the subconscious can give you that information is by going into your mind and finding something sort of similar. And it will do that very rapidly, and it will give you that. It may give you the impression of a swimming pool, and you can't assume it's a swimming pool because the subconscious is not that accurate. It's giving you a representation. It's a feeling, a smell of a swimming pool. So what you have to do is decide what parts of that swimming pool are real and what aren't. You have to tear it apart in your head. You have to decide, is this something I would want to climb into, put on a bathing suit and jump into? Oh God, no, it doesn't strike me as being something I'd want to do. Okay, then as we now know it's not a swimming pool. Why is it something you wouldn't jump into? Does it smell bad? Yeah, that feels right. Feels like it would smell really, really bad. So you break it down into these parts and pieces, and you report only the pieces that you know are right. You don't report the pieces that are like not right or don't feel right. And over time, as you tear the target apart that way, some things will start to come together and some won't. And you never force anything. You never jump. You never say, well, there's 4 circles here and a lot of metal and it's moving. Oh, it must be a vehicle. No, you don't make that assumption. You say exactly that. It's got a lot of metal to it. It's got 4 circular parts, all separate, and it's moving. That's all you say about it. You don't add, you don't make it something that it's not because you don't have enough information. So applying that, you need to know something about the science. We also know that there are times when remote viewing will work better than not. There's places where it works better than not. There's types of targets that are better or not. In fact, there's a lot of reasons why some targets produce volumes of information. It doesn't improve accuracy. We just know there'll be more information there that can be reported. It's just so many different things you can learn from the science. And there's 1.4 million words of science that are printed. You can obtain that information by going on the internet. Just look up at Dr. May or any of the Dr. May will be listed in Amazon.com for that data. He did a fine job when he got all that printed because it really is the meat of the entire remote viewing subject, in my opinion. What I just put up is an example of the credentials that we were given by the Russians from their psychic unit. Dr. May and I went to Russia a couple times, and we met all of our counterparts. We met their leaders and whatnot, and met some of their psychics. And I actually did some psychic experiments in their lab, in their facility. And they were isolation booths buried in the ground. Very interesting facility they have. They did not do remote viewing. They targeted our cabinet, senators, congressmen, president. They tried to raise anxiety in individuals so they make mistakes in their decision making or become anxious about some things that they were doing or not doing, that sort of thing. Most of that was all based on some experiments that seemed to work, but the experiments were seriously flawed. And as I had said before, if you don't have a solid moral and ethical base for what you're doing, you can't expect to get any better. and I think they spent a long time not getting any better. And they were surprised at the capacity that we had developed with our remote viewing. In fact, they were well aware of the fact that we could actually target their unit from America and sketch much of it. But we made some good friends there, and I thought we were getting somewhere. But then President Yeltsin had a heart attack and passed, and all that went away. Plus, we did not get good response from our own people when we returned. I took a picture of this church. This church is interesting. This church now stands where there used to be the largest swimming pool in Moscow. At the end of the Second World War, Stalin was going to build a huge monument there, 19 stories tall, which would be basically him standing on a Roman pedestal with his hands spread out over Moscow as the great leader of communism and whatnot. And it kept falling down. The foundation for it kept collapsing because they didn't put in enough concrete, and then they would fix it. And then they didn't put enough steel, and it would fall down again. And he got really angry, so they bulldozed the whole place, and to include this particular church, and put a big swimming pool in there. It turned out it's the largest bathhouse in Moscow. So when the wall came down, what they did is they went in and destroyed the bathhouse, destroyed the swimming pool, and rebuilt the church. And when we were in this church, we saw the actual photographs of the old church. This church is identical down to the types of granite that were the same colors of granite, same types of granite that were used in the original church. There's nothing different between this church and the original church. And the miraculous thing about it is all the icons, the hanging candle lights, and all the fixtures, everything is the exact same thing that came out of the original church. Where was all that hidden during all those years? Nobody knows. They just reappeared when they rebuilt the church. It's an amazing thing to see. That's in Moscow. That's the number of times I visited Moscow, 2000, 2004. What we've learned about remote viewing. It operates just like any other sense. Intent and expectation for outcome affects the results. In other words, if you have a clear intention for why you're doing it, you have a clear understanding for how it works and pay attention to the details that you're applying it with, and then you have an expectation for the actual outcome that you're going to experience, and everybody's on the same sheet of music, it'll work extremely well. And I mean very well. If you don't pay attention to that, it never will. And the neat thing about it is those same principles can be attached to running a business. If you have all those three applications in mind and you pay attention to them when you're building a business, it will be successful. So there's nothing in the world that isn't done that doesn't have those three parts or pieces to it. For some reason, local sidereal time has an effect on the outcome. What that means is 13 point something hours, depending on where you're standing, local sidereal time. It has a very good effect because you're not looking dead into the center of the Milky Way or out 180 degrees away. You're at a right angle to that line of sight to the center of the Milky Way. And for some reason, you can produce upwards of 6 or 7-fold increased amount of material information. Doesn't make it right, but it will give you a lot of information to report. If you can improve your remote viewing and pick your local sidereal time to do it, it should improve everything. The difference is If you can have everything about local sidereal time working against you, and you could still do an excellent job, depending on the intent. If the intent is life and death, it will work anyway. So none of the rules are hard and fast in remote viewing, in my opinion. For some reason, localized electromagnetic noise, earth noise, has an effect on outcome. We don't know why, but it does, because it's not electromagnetic. Information, remote viewing information comes from some source we don't understand. It's delivered in some way that's instantaneous, regardless of distance. We know very little about how it gets to the mind, to the human. With an occasional exception, remote viewers don't know when they are right or wrong. In other words, as a remote viewer, I cannot tell you with absolute surety when I'm right or when I'm wrong. All I can do is develop a method where I will be right more times than I'm wrong. The perfect remote viewer is someone, when you look at their results, they are completely accurate. When you look at the results and they aren't completely accurate, that's the best remote viewer. Someone who sometimes is, sometimes isn't, is a pain in the neck to work with. With an occasional exception, remote viewers do not know when they are right or wrong. I already said that, sorry. Real targets work better than pooled targets. So live targets are much better. It's never perfect. It will never be perfect. So if you see perfect, it's a lie. It's talent driven. This is local sidereal time, how it works. This is the center peak. That's 13 point something, 20 hours. The two lower peaks are when it shouldn't work, but it does work sometimes. The minor peak to the left is another good time to be doing local sidereal time. So this is what it looks like. Earth, plane of Earth's horizon, looking away from the center of the Milky Way. That's the smaller peak. Looking directly into the Milky Way, that's the worst time. And 90 degrees away from the center of the Milky Way, that's the best time to do remote viewing. We don't know why. There's so much about remote viewing you could talk about. The point I'm trying to make here is so many people are out there teaching it now, and they actually don't know what the heck they're doing. They're saying things about it that aren't true. They're teaching things that can't be done. They're making assumptions about accuracy that are completely off the wall. It can be used for a lot of things, and it can save lives, and it can find missing people, and it can do a lot of things like that. But it takes years of investment from a remote viewing standpoint. It's not as easy as it sounds. It actually is a martial art of the mind. It's something you have to become involved in completely your whole life, and you benefit from it. But don't become involved, and all you're doing is fooling yourself. And it's a shame, but there are a lot of people out there making a ton of money doing stupid stuff with it, and it damages the veracity of it, what it was actually discovered that it could do. And the determination was it is a threat. It's a huge threat. Did they do anything about it? No, they shut it down and released everything to the internet to try to, and ridicule it, to try to drive that idea. And that's exactly what happened. And it's just that I'm sad, because out of the original people and the original six, I'm the only one that's still talking about it. And, everybody else is dead or gone. And it's sad, because a lot of things are being said now. A lot of people are saying, oh, I know where they went wrong in the science. And they give examples of 2 or 3 experiments that it's ludicrous, you know. And it's kind of like holding the ocean back. But then I think sometimes it's not ready. People aren't ready for it yet. It's probably going to take 10 or 15 years for somebody to find out that it's truly of value and can be used.
Well,
I,
Joe,
it comes right out of our creativity, John.
right. Well,
You know,
anytime we talk about psi, anytime we talk about any sort of psi ability or activity that people are doing, um, or any ability, it doesn't matter psi or not.
right?
To become
Exactly.
a really top notch in any ability takes many years of practice. And some people, they'll catch an early wave of it and feel
Yeah,
it themselves. And they'll think they have a great deal of knowledge. And they do. They have more knowledge than the general public.
yeah.
But there's a lot more to learn.
A lot more
There's
to learn, and
always more to learn.
as much as we know from a science standpoint, we don't know. We hardly know anything about how it exists. You know, but what makes humans different? And is it just humans? Maybe not. You know, more and more you see other animal life gravitating to us. You know, whales, dolphins, dogs, larger animals, elephants. There's herds of elephants that still visit the people's grave sites on the anniversary of their death. They never forget. You know, we don't know anything about this planet. We just take from it what we want. And, and that's missing the whole thing, the whole point of it. So, and I know I went over, and I'm sorry. If anybody has some questions they want answered, I'll stick around and answer some questions.
Oh my goodness, Joe, there are so many questions. I value your time, and I know that you have other commitments that you have to work with. But if you wouldn't mind staying just for a few minutes, I would
Sure,
like to ask just a couple more questions. One of the
sure.
one of the questions that came up I thought was really interesting is that when you show examples of your viewing in the different drawings you've done, you seem
Uh-huh.
to be looking at them from very different perspectives. Some of them are
Oh
from
yeah,
aerial
it's
views, some of them are from side views,
yeah,
and also you have a wonderful artistic ability. Can you
yes.
talk a little bit about the value of perspective and the artistic ability?
Well, perspective comes out of doing them a long time. You know, I was not good at perspective when I first started. It took 3 years to get good at perspective, some perspective. Being able to direct my viewing to a point of describing everything around an actual target, that's like 5 years of work. Um, the thing I find hilarious is people say, "Oh, he's a natural. He does it." No, I worked as hard at it as any human being on the planet, and had to in order to get it done. But then I had the advantage of being in the military, and that was what I was doing 24/7. So, you know, and the other part is the intent of the targets I worked on were like extremely high intent because they were life and death. So, you know, I learned a lot about how my head worked doing that. And I think the reason why the perspective is so interesting is I think remote viewing, and this is my opinion, has to do with memory. It doesn't have to do with not just my memory, but other people's memories of targets. So it's almost like an understanding for something why it exists in the memory of humans. And I think that's where the information is actually coming from. It's coming out of a consolidated memory of millions of people, or just a handful of people who've actually been the only ones that saw something. And that's what's getting reported on. So
That's really interesting, Joe. And so it sounds to me like you're almost describing an aspect of telepathy, what we would call
yeah,
telepathy,
yeah,
as a big component of this.
I think so. I think to a great degree. But then there's lots of bits of information in there that can't be accounted for in telepathy. So you know, it's a deeper sense of the memory that someone has that they can't remember it all. It's like nobody can remember all of anything they've seen. It's a perception that they get when they see something. Like the first automobile you saw was like, okay. Now later, if somebody says, describe it, you're going to leave a lot of parts out because you weren't studying it to that degree. But as you see more and more of them, they become easier and easier to understand.
Mhm.
It's that kind of, it's like a memory thing.
Mhm. Well,
Uh,
and I think we oftentimes, as researchers, from the research perspective, we try to
uh,
break down into these little components of telepathy and clairvoyance,
right.
whereas it's getting information and it's gathering it through a number of different means. So it doesn't have to be just one.
No, it
It
could
can
be a
be multiple
consolidation of stuff.
multiple ways. And this relates to when we talk about remote viewing, people
Uh,
oftentimes consider it to be a visual sense, but you're
it's
describing
not.
it much differently. Can you talk a
You
little bit
know,
about that?
that's the mistake people make. It's the reason the first thing they do is they go, they're trying to see something. And that automatically cuts off any idea of using any other sense. But if you sit there and you disassociate from the room, you go into, it's like daydreaming. Like you're going to go on vacation and somebody comes up and snaps their fingers in front of your face because you're not in the room anymore. That's remote viewing. That's where you are, is in that daydreaming state. You're disassociated from everything else except that place that you are like focusing on. And it's usually a preferred view. The one that really says it all is the thing that gets reported on. That's why I think it's memories that are being collected and captured, not the actual target. So there are things that are left out that may have been there in the first place, but aren't there now. And there's things that are put in that aren't there now, but people remember for some reason or another. It's just, it feels that way to me. And I could be wrong, but
Well, Joe, there were a lot of questions that came up related to the research and the
uh-huh.
research that's been done. And we happen to have Ed May here with us today.
Oh, cool.
And
Very
so,
cool.
Ed, I was wondering if you would mind joining us on stage to talk a little bit about where people can learn more about this stuff. Welcome,
There you
Ed.
go.
Hey, it's great to see you again.
Hey,
Yeah,
Edward.
same here, John. Hi, Joe. Before I get started, because I'll be really brief, we have somebody, a friend of mine from Stockholm, Sweden, and it's 3 in the morning there. You're on your go to sleep, my friend. Anyway, Joe, nicely done. I'm proud of you. You did a damn good thing. I just want to tell everybody that Joe and I have been working together since 1978.
Yeah, long
And
time.
what's amazing, we still speak to each other. Oh my God,
We don't
But
agree all the time either. You got to understand that. But we
yeah,
learn a lot from each other that way.
it's wonderful when we disagree because he's right. We learn quite a bit from each other. And one point I want to make for Joe, a bit of bragging on his behalf. In 1969, Margaret Mead, who was head of the AAAS at that time, and had the PA, Parapsychological Association, join the AAAS as a participating membership, which is really good. But from Joe's point of view, he is the first and maybe the only. Well, the PA has three membership qualities: student, uh, regular member, and then professional member. And as far as I know, Joe, you're the only psychic as a professional member of the Parapsychological Association. Well earned.
Wow.
Anyway, okay. Brief story I wanted to tell back in the, you were talking about the mirrors and all of that.
Yeah.
Uh, there was another person in the car with us, just a delightful, brilliant woman named Beverly Humphrey. So it's Beverly Humphrey, Joe, and a guy driving us to the feedback to give Joe the feedback of the microwave system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're stopped in front of this 100-yard series of mirrors focusing the sun at the top of this tower, just exploding. And Beverly said, put a stack over his head. Okay, but the point of this is a piece of science. What would happen if we had shown the feedback first and then what drove by the mirrors. Joe, what do you think?
I don't think it would have been in the whole thing. It wouldn't have been there.
The mirrors would not
Remote
have showed
viewing.
up. And in fact, I have an experiment designed to do exactly that test
Mhm.
this coming year.
Yeah, because the feed lap closes the loop.
Yes, exactly.
And once you close the loop, there's no other remote viewing going on.
Well, it's a big and most important question, and that is if we humans had access to all space at all time and were cognitively aware of that, to use a psychiatric term, we'd all go boogoos loony in a heartbeat.
No
So
kidding.
then the question is, what opens the door to that flow of information and what closes the door? And I think we know what closes the door, but it's crapshoot what opens it.
Yeah. Well,
The
well,
feedback
what
may
opens
close the
it is
door.
just looking at me and saying, you know, you really need to get some rest because we're going to do uh-oh, Joe just got the target. It really screws up being able
Yeah,
to
well,
target.
we did a remote viewing series at Stanford Dream Laboratory, and we were looking at all this stuff, and we got no psychic functioning out of that guy at all. The problem is all the psychic functioning happened as he's pulling into the parking lot,
Yeah,
and all the EEG stuff and all the other crap going on didn't
right.
matter.
Doesn't matter then. That's the
Wild, huh?
problem.
So, one of the questions that continuously came up was where can I learn more about the research? And I can't think of a better person to ask this than you two right here tonight.
Tell them about the books, Ed.
Well, the CIA released in 2000 and 2003 a huge amount of data from that they'd collected through the Stargate era and all this money paid for by the federal government. And Joe keeps pointing out they didn't release all of it, and I'll let him talk about that. It's still a massive amount of material. And
There's a couple of
Sonali
them.
Marwa, that's it. You're showing them. Oh
These
my
are a
God.
couple of them.
What, you got the Rhine Center to pay $100 a piece for those?
Hey Ed, sometimes things got to come out of your own pocket.
No,
Whoa.
right. They're a good thing and a bad thing. They're good in the sense that it documents what the government paid for all those years. On the other hand, they are not meant to be read by the general population that are geeky as bloody hell. I mean, in some cases,
Yeah,
difficult to understand. If
definitely
you want
geeky.
to know a little bit about it, read a book that Joe and I and others um, authored called ESP Wars, East and West.
Yeah.
And that's non-technical, and there's some funny stuff in there. You know, Joe running around Moscow naked. No, you weren't actually doing that. He was thinking about it.
No, I was drunk.
And he and I have been traveled a lot together. We were in Stockholm, Sweden together. We were in Budapest, Hungary together, and Moscow a couple of times, I think we went.
Yeah.
To me, that church that you showed is an absolutely gorgeous, stunning thing. There's a side story to that. That
Yeah.
In 1994, a artist decided to build a statue that, as a present to the United States, the statue was going to be as tall as the
Yeah.
Statue of Liberty. It was so butt ugly that the U.S. turned it down.
Yeah.
But not to be determined, they stuck it in the Moscow River right next to to the Kremlin, and people come and laugh at it and renamed it. They said it's Peter the Great. No, you look through the binoculars, he's an Italian guy discovering America. It's a citywide joke.
Yeah. It glows in the dark too from all the radioactivity in the river.
Well, that's all I wanted to talk about. It's Joe's story, and it's really excellent. And we have how many people do we have listening?
There's about 70 people here that's been here tonight.
Wow, that's good. I'm glad they
So
enjoyed it.
Ed, your laboratory that you've been running for so many years, you have publications listed on your website that people can get to?
I have, yes, there's some of them, in fact, most of them. We've done a lot of we actually published stuff for a change. Oh my God, you know.
Right.
Oh, geez.
Okay, what is your website so I can put it in the chat for people?
Okay, how about if I stick it there for you?
Sure. Sure.
Okay, let's see, I'll take this out here to everyone.
I just
I
want
didn't
to
do
give people a way that they can get to some accurate information about the topics that we're talking about tonight, so that we're not because if you search the web, as you were saying, Joe, you can find so much in so many different areas.
Here's the
Some,
website.
mhm,
Exactly, yes.
yes.
Now, it's when we put it together, I thought it was pretty nifty, but it's way antiquish now when I look at it. But it's got
Well,
some good information on it.
but if people can find more information about the research and some of the publications that have been put out and things, that's a
Yeah,
wonderful,
yeah,
wonderful
you'll be able to find
resource.
it there.
Good. Well, thank
All
you, Ed.
right,
I appreciate
my
you joining us
pleasure.
for a few minutes.
You bet. Take care,
Thank you,
everybody.
Ed.
It's been really a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, maybe we could do this again. I'll just answer questions.
We could do that, and you know what I would like if you would just take. Can you just take 2 minutes or so and talk
Sure.
about how you were introduced to the Rhine? This is our 90th anniversary.
Oh yeah. What happened is we were outed on night. I somehow or another I scratched my nose with my
I can see
glasses.
that. Yes.
Um, we we were outed by the CIA on Nightline, and right after that, I was on vacation. It was the first vacation I had in a couple of years, and my wife and I and others went together and rented a house in Kitty Hawk. And while we were at Kitty Hawk, we suddenly got a visit from a major network with their cameras and everything else, wanting to do an interview. But it wasn't an appropriate place to do the interview. So what they did is they flew us to Durham. We kept driving around looking for a place that we could talk uh, where there would be no wind and interfering noises from trucks and stuff. We couldn't find anything. So somebody suggested, well, maybe we should go by and see uh, whoever lives at JB Rhine's house and see if we can use the house. So we arrive at the house, and of course Sally is there, Sally Feather, and we knocked on the door, and she came to the door, and she did not know me. I mean, we were all total strangers standing there. And I explained to her what was happening. Now, you got to understand, I was nervous as all get out because I'd never been on television. I was an intelligence officer. I'd been doing classified work for years. And all of a sudden, I'm going to be on national television. I'm terrified. And she answered the door, and I explained what was going on. She didn't hesitate for a second. She brought us inside. There was a beautiful fire in the fireplace. She arranged J.B. Rhine's rocker in front of the fireplace and set everything up. And I was sitting in J.B. Rhine's rocker in his home in front of his fireplace giving my interview. And I can't tell you how that calmed me down, how it made me feel.
Mhm.
I think that was the most respect I'd gotten up until that point. Because up until then I was attacked all the time for doing the work of the devil, doing God's work, doing this, doing that, not doing this, it was just really a great thing that she did, and it helped me so much. And so I came back to the Rhine, and I haven't stopped coming back since. I mean, why not? Yeah,
And we appreciate it, Joe. I mean, yeah, as I
yeah,
said, my first real introduction to stepping through the door of the Rhine was when you had a remote viewing class in 2008
yeah,
at the
yeah,
Rhine. That's the first time that I actually engaged with the Rhine, even though I'd known about them for 30 years beforehand.
yeah.
That was the first time I walked through the doors,
Cool.
and I've learned so much just speaking with you and listening to you over the years, as
Well,
I'm sure many people who are here with us tonight can say the same thing. Joe,
yeah.
you say you can't teach remote viewing or you can't teach it beyond a certain level. You have taught so much to so many people,
Well,
whether it be remote
yeah.
viewing or just or other things.
Well,
You are definitely a teacher, Joe.
I have to tell you, John, it's not just the remote viewing. If you understand remote viewing, you understand how to make your life better. Remember I said there's intention, attention to detail, and expectation for outcome. That's necessary in every single thing you do. If you're consciously awake and aware and you're making your decisions in that way and acting on them in that way, your life gets better. It's a feedback loop. It comes back to you just like the feedback you get in remote viewing. Over and over, it just keeps getting better and better. And as you get better and better, your morality becomes more solid. Your everything about your character changes. It's like any other martial art you learn. There's a lot that comes with it. Not the idea that you can just go beat people up or something. No, it's it's the characterization of it that builds you as a person. And so that's why I teach it. It's the only reason I teach it, because in actuality, it's not just the viewer. It's a team thing. It's the viewer, the analyst, the monitor. It's the team and how it operates together. And if it doesn't operate smoothly together, it can't be successful at all.
It's almost like the remote viewing is kind of a side effect of
Yeah,
living a good life.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that's what I try to share with people. And I've done that with, golly, hundreds and hundreds of people. And I get feedback from some of those people, and some of them have gone off and done really good things. So
Yes.
I'm excited by that.
Well, and thank you, Joe. It's been great tonight.